The town of Asheville, Virginia, was the kind of place where life moved slowly, tucked between green hills and silent rivers. Captain James Riley had always believed that the true strength of America wasn't in its skyscrapers or its armies, but in its quiet places, where fathers grilled steaks on Sundays, where old veterans played checkers in front of grocery stores, and where children rode their bikes until sunset painted the sky red. It was home. It was everything worth fighting for. James sat on the worn wooden steps of his porch, a quiet hum of summer insects around him, the stars beginning to creep out overhead. His daughter, Emily, only 8, had fallen asleep beside him, a book still open on her lap. His wife, Sarah, worked late shifts at the hospital. These moments, rare and fragile, felt eternal to him. But peace has a strange way of marking its own end. That night, there was something wrong about the sky. At first, it was subtle. The wind died down unnaturally. The crickets fell silent. Even the dogs across the town stopped barking mid-howl. Then came the sound, deep, vibrating, like the earth itself was holding its breath. People stepped out of their homes, confusion giving way to unease. James stood slowly, his instincts sharpened from years of war zones overseas, kicking like an old machine sparking to life. The stars, they were moving. A faint line of glowing shapes began to form above the clouds, too perfect, too straight to be natural. The town of Asheville wasn't the only place watching. Across every major city in America, every village, every stretch of forgotten highway, millions stared skyward as those glowing dots multiplied. And then, like a curtain being ripped down, the clouds gave way to the unimaginable. Alien vessels, massive, unearthly structures hovered in the atmosphere, silent and watching. Their design was unlike anything James had seen, brutal, efficient, with a cold metallic shine that caught the moonlight in terrifying ways. Fear wasn't the first emotion, it was awe, but awe quickly turned to horror. Without warning, the skies bloomed with light. Beams of energy, the color of molten steel, lanced down across the planet, striking power plants, military bases, and communication hubs with brutal precision. The first strike wasn't a warning. It was war. James gathered Emily in his arms, sprinting inside as the ground shuddered beneath them. Cell signals died. Power flickered once, twice, then vanished. The entire world was thrown backward a century in a single breath. The news would later reveal what those first hours looked like. NORAD, gone. The Pentagon, silent. Major naval fleets, crippled. Satellites, dust in orbit. Whoever these invaders were, they had studied Earth well. They hit not to conquer, but to decapitate. And leading them all was General Zalzor, a warlord from a species known across the galaxy as harvesters. To them, Earth was no different than the dozens of planets they had subjugated before. Weak, divided, predictable. To him, humanity was a species of tribes and borders, of scattered armies and short memories. He saw the cities. He saw the weapons. But he didn't see James Riley. He didn't see Asheville. He didn't see what made Earth impossible to break. As panic spread, James didn't head for safety. His mind was already working in ways the aliens hadn't accounted for. He knew war wasn't won in boardrooms or space stations. It was won in the dirt, in the backyards of ordinary men who refused to kneel. He kissed Emily's forehead, whispered a promise that would become the reason he survived. I will find a way back to you. Across the country, stories just like James's began to bloom like wildfires. Police officers became soldiers. Farmers became scouts. Mechanics rigged old radios into crude communication systems. Veterans, long forgotten, dusted off their rifles. Neighborhoods fortified themselves, street by street. But the horror wasn't just in the skies. The harvesters began their ground campaign days later. Their soldiers, tall, armored creatures bred for war, moved through ruined cities like ghosts, herding survivors into camps for forced labor. Humanity wasn't just being beaten. They were being humiliated. James wouldn't allow that. Using every scrap of his training, he began assembling a resistance cell. It started small. A few locals, a retired Marine, a nurse, a teenage hacker who once got expelled for crashing his school's Wi-Fi. They called themselves Asheville's Last Light, not because they believed they could win, but because they refused to go dark without fighting. Each day brought new horrors. Families were torn apart. Survivors were executed publicly as warnings. James saw it all. He felt the weight of every loss. But something else stirred beneath the fear, rage. And he wasn't alone. Across America, pockets of resistance formed, isolated, desperate, but determined. These weren't armies in the traditional sense. These were school teachers laying IEDs, mechanics turning junkyards into death traps, hunters tracking alien patrols like deer in the woods of Kentucky. It wasn't organized. It wasn't clean. But it was human. General Zalzor watched with cold detachment. He believed this resistance was merely the last twitch of a dying species. He admired their stubbornness, but saw it as irrelevant. He didn't understand what was coming. He didn't understand that Earth's greatest weapon wasn't its technology or its armies. It was its people. And James Riley was about to show him exactly why that mistake would cost him everything. James Riley didn't sleep that night. Nobody did. By morning, the truth wasn't speculation anymore. The images were everywhere. Satellites captured them clearly. Ships, thousands, orbiting Earth like vultures waiting for the moment to descend. The president addressed the nation with calm words, but there was a tremor beneath every sentence. The world had seen wars, terrorism, disasters, but this was different. This was alien. General Zalzor, leader of the Crixorian Dominion, observed Earth from his flagship with the cold detachment of a being who had seen 1,000 worlds fall. To him, Earth was backward, fractured, soft. Humanity was divided by borders, politics, greed, primitive weapons, primitive minds. He had studied their history. Civil wars, world wars, countless internal conflicts. The only thing humans were consistent at was fighting each other. That, to him, was weakness. Zalzor gave the order without hesitation. His strategy was clear. Disable global communications, cripple power grids, hit the military infrastructure first, then control the population with fear. Standard procedure. It had worked perfectly across galaxies. Earth wouldn't be different. Within hours, the first wave began. Massive Crixorian ships, shaped like jagged spears, punched through the atmosphere. Major cities lost power instantly. Satellites blinked out one by one. Fighter jets scrambled but were swatted down like insects. Zalzor's technology was beyond anything Earth had. The world was suffocating under his shadow. But what Zalzor didn't understand, couldn't possibly understand, was what happened next. Across the United States, military commanders abandoned their centralized systems. They reverted to old-school tactics. Radio silence, runners, Morse code, paper maps. Veterans from past wars took charge in rural areas, forming militias that used guerrilla tactics perfected in forgotten jungles and deserts. The American spirit wasn't housed in skyscrapers or high-tech weapons. It lived in the stubborn hearts of people who refused to be conquered. James Riley was activated within hours of the invasion. His orders were simple: survive, organize, resist. The unit he joined was a patchwork of Marines, Army Rangers, National Guard, ex-cops, hunters, even teenagers with more courage than sense. They didn't have drones or air superiority. They had rifles, handmade explosives, and a knowledge of their land that no alien general could replicate. In the forests of Virginia, they moved like ghosts. Every attempt by Zalzor's forces to control the region was met with unexpected brutality. Supply lines were sabotaged. Patrols vanished. Traps were laid not with advanced tech, but with fishing wire, gasoline, and raw cunning. The aliens had energy weapons, but humans fought dirty. They used mud, darkness, and fear. Zalzor increased his efforts, sending in elite units, taller, stronger, heavily armored Crixorian soldiers bred for war. But against all logic, they were losing, not in open battle, but in the places between battles. Snipers took them out from impossible distances. Roads were mined. Bridges collapsed after humans lured alien transports onto them. Every dead alien was stripped of gear. Every captured weapon studied and repurposed. Elsewhere in America, the story was the same. Texas militias coordinated with Navy SEAL teams. Chicago's underground tunnels became deadly traps. Appalachia turned into an ungovernable nightmare. for Crixorian patrols. In the bayous of Louisiana, swamp fighters melted into the water, striking like ghosts. Every inch of American soil was contested not by soldiers bound by rank, but by people bound by survival. The aliens made mistakes. They bombed civilian areas thinking it would break morale. It didn't. It turned farmers into fighters. It turned ordinary men and women into killers with nothing left to lose. Every burned house, every destroyed school, every lost family added another name to the resistance. What Zalzor couldn't see from his perfect war room was that Earth didn't need to win in space. It only needed to bleed him dry on the ground. Communication lines between resistance groups were slow, crude, but they worked. Messages hidden in songs, symbols carved into trees. Old World War II tactics revived overnight. American soldiers became unpredictable. They didn't follow the rule book. They didn't break. Where most conquered worlds gave up under Crixorian dominance, humans adapted. They got meaner. James Riley led his unit like a ghost. No permanent base. No direct confrontations. Strike fast, disappear faster. They hunted Crixorian officers, captured alien tech, reverse-engineered weapons in makeshift labs run by college dropouts and mechanics. The ingenuity was terrifying. In less than 2 weeks, the humans were fielding crude versions of alien plasma rifles powered by car batteries. The world was watching. Broadcasts of resistance fights leaked through damaged Crixorian signal blocks. Videos of ragtag American units destroying alien tanks with nothing but homemade IED spread like wildfire. Hope wasn't centralized, it was viral. Zalzor responded with overwhelming force. He ordered entire regions glassed from orbit. Forests burned. Towns were reduced to ash. But the more ground he destroyed, the more unpredictable humans became. They didn't fight for land anymore. They fought for revenge. Human prisoners didn't beg. They smiled. They taunted. Many chose death over surrender. Entire units walked into certain suicide just to take out one Crixorian officer. These were not the statistics Zalzor had expected. The psychological warfare turned against him. Worse, the humans were learning. Every battle made them better, faster, smarter. They began to exploit the limitations of Crixorian tech. They discovered that the aliens' energy weapons overheated in Earth's humidity. They learned the armor gaps on elite soldiers. They built traps specifically designed for Crixorian physiology. The forests, the mountains, the rivers, all became weapons. Zalzor had conquered countless worlds, but never one like this. This wasn't war. This was survival perfected into vengeance. James Riley found himself deep within the Appalachian Mountains, now part of a scattered and furious resistance. The Crixorian strategy of decapitating leadership had failed in ways they hadn't predicted. Human soldiers weren't bound by central command. They operated in small units, off-grid, using terrain and instinct honed by centuries of guerrilla warfare. What Zalzor read as chaos was something else entirely, adaptability. The aliens advanced with confidence, taking cities that were already stripped of life. But the rural regions were different. The mountains were silent during the day and deadly at night. Teams like Riley's moved without lights, without signals, communicating through gestures and trust built from shared survival. They attacked fuel convoys, ambushed patrols, sabotaged alien supply lines. Every loss inflicted on Earth's defenders only sharpened their will. Zalzor grew frustrated. His tactical meetings became colder, his orders more aggressive. Crixorian troops were advanced in armor, weapons, and detection, but they were used to clean wars. Occupations where the enemy surrendered quickly. Here, they faced an enemy that didn't break. Every soldier killed became a name passed along like fire in the dark. Entire towns became ghost traps, their empty streets wired with explosives. Forest paths became graveyards of armored walkers, torn apart by homemade devices. But it wasn't just soldiers fighting back. Civilians, mechanics, hunters, farmers, engineers turned their skills to warfare. They stripped down alien tech, rebuilt it, turned it against its makers. Old factories repurposed themselves into weapons labs overnight. Zalzor watched footage of Earth soldiers using their fallen weapons, adapting, changing, growing deadlier by the hour. The Crixorian Empire had seen war on a galactic scale, but they had never faced hatred like this. It wasn't just resistance. It was personal. Humanity didn't see them as gods or conquerors. They saw them as invaders of their homes, threats to their families, destroyers of their peace. That kind of enemy doesn't surrender. James Riley's name spread quietly across the resistance, not as a hero, but as a ghost. He led brutal raids into occupied cities, leaving behind messages carved into walls. Asterisk, you'll never own this world. Asterisk, entire units of Crixorian soldiers vanished without trace in regions marked as safe. Alien commanders began refusing mountain assignments. Morale dropped sharply. Zalzor responded with terror tactics. He ordered the execution of civilians. Entire towns were leveled from orbit, but even this backfired. Footage of burning American towns, lifeless neighborhoods, schools reduced to ash. They didn't break human spirit. They cemented it. The resistance grew coordinated. Old military satellites were secretly restored. Shortwave radios reactivated. Information passed through underground networks. The scattered survivors of the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines joined hands with everyday Americans, forming an alliance not built on rank, but on survival. The most damaging blow to Zalzor's campaign didn't come from any superweapon. It came from human unpredictability. They used rivers to float explosives into alien docks. They dropped heavy construction equipment onto patrols from skyscrapers. Entire forests were lit aflame to trap advancing Crixorian forces. It wasn't war in any conventional sense. It was total resistance born from raw human defiance. James Riley was now leading missions hundreds of miles away from Asheville. He had seen too much to be the man he once was. But his purpose sharpened with every mission. This wasn't about orders anymore. This was about Emily, about Sarah, about every home reduced to rubble, about the soundless night stolen from innocent people. The Crixorian generals finally realized that Earth wasn't losing control. It had never relied on control in the first place. Humanity fought like no other species because their strength wasn't just in their weapons. It was in their hearts, their stubbornness, their refusal to kneel. The moment of realization came too late. Zalzor ordered the construction of a doomsday device, one final strike to force Earth into submission. But even that plan was already bleeding. Human engineers had intercepted alien communications. Resistance leaders pieced together its location. Teams mobilized, scattered groups of soldiers, farmers, and ex-civilians moving as one silent fist. Riley's unit was chosen for the impossible mission: infiltrate Zalzor's fortress and destroy his final weapon. The world held its breath. The Crixorian army advanced further inland, but what General Zalzor failed to realize was that every step forward was costing him more than he could calculate. His casualty reports grew longer. Resources dwindled faster than planned. The mountainous regions of the United States were consuming his forces like a living nightmare. The enemy didn't act like any force he had encountered. They didn't retreat when outnumbered. They didn't surrender when surrounded. They adapted faster than his war council believed possible. James Riley and others like him operated like ghosts. Hit-and-run tactics destroyed supply depots. Communications were jammed with primitive but effective methods. Even the terrain fought against the invaders. Bridges collapsed at the right moments. Roads turned into traps. Rivers were poisoned to shut down alien harvesting machines. What Zalzor had calculated as a 2-week planetary subjugation turned into a brutal, grinding conflict. Worse still, the human spirit of innovation turned into a weapon. Captured Crixorian tech was no longer a mystery. American engineers and scientists, working from basements and abandoned schools, tore apart the captured devices. In less than a month, primitive versions of energy weapons began appearing in the hands of Earth's fighters. Vehicles once belonging to Crixorian forces were now running on patched Earth systems. Nothing stayed alien for long. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't just their endurance. It was their refusal to stop learning. Zalzor, watching from orbit, ordered a tactical escalation. He authorized orbital strikes on resistant regions, expecting to shatter morale. But the strikes only hardened human resolve. Entire towns evacuated before bombardments, leaving behind General Zalzor stood on the bridge of his burning flagship, staring in disbelief at the unfolding disaster. The skies above Earth, which once belonged entirely to his fleet, were now filled with chaos. Human fighter jets mixed with stolen alien craft, operating together with brutal efficiency. His once dominant army was crumbling, not because they lacked strength or technology, but because they had underestimated the one force no calculation could predict: the human heart. James Riley, wounded but alive, led one of the final coordinated assaults from the ground. Communications blacked out, leadership fragmented, but every soldier, every civilian, every surviving resistance fighter shared a single burning objective: drive the invaders out of their home. In less than 8 weeks, humanity had turned a planet-wide invasion into a brutal, personal war of survival. American resistance groups had achieved the impossible. They had learned to operate alien weaponry, fly capture vessels, and most critically, hack into Krixorian command systems. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it worked. Fragmented signals revealed locations of alien supply ships. Downed satellites were turned into crude missile guidance systems. Small towns hidden in the Rockies became forward operating bases. Every mile gained by the Krixorian army now came with devastating cost. Zalzor, desperate, initiated his final protocol: full withdrawal and orbital bombardment. But it was already too late. Earth's forces, relentless and unbroken, had discovered the location of his central command ship, not through technology, but through human intelligence, captured communications, intercepted patterns, survivors reporting strange movements in the sky. Riley and his team volunteered for the suicide mission. Using a stolen Krixorian dropship, barely held together by human engineering and sheer willpower, Riley's team ascended to the battered atmosphere. They knew they weren't coming back. But it didn't matter. The mission wasn't about survival anymore. It was about sending a message that Earth was never going to kneel. As they broke through into low orbit, dodging debris and scattered remains of alien vessels, the true scale of humanity's impact became clear. What once was a mighty, unified fleet now looked fractured and desperate. The Krixorian command structure was in disarray. Smaller alien ships refused to follow orders. Automated defense systems were overworked, overused, and glitching due to continuous Earth-based interference. Riley's dropship, broadcasting a false Krixorian identification signal cobbled together from hacked data, slipped past the outer perimeter, close enough to see the towering structure of Zalzor's flagship, a monstrous vessel built to intimidate and dominate. But intimidation had no place here anymore. Inside the alien command center, alarms screamed warnings in harsh, guttural tones. Zalzor's face twisted in confusion and fury. His perfect invasion had become a nightmare. His elite guard fell quickly, not to superior weapons, but to superior grit. Hand-to-hand combat in narrow corridors. Humans fighting like animals, willing to die if it meant taking one more alien with them. His soldiers had never faced such rage, or such love for a home. Riley reached the control chamber, badly wounded but still standing. Behind him, his team had sacrificed everything. But now came the final act. Planting the device, built from human explosives combined with Krixorian energy cells, directly into the ship's power core. Zalzor arrived too late to stop it. Standing across from a bloody human soldier, the general realized a terrible truth. It wasn't their technology that had failed. It wasn't their strategy. It was their arrogance. Earth wasn't just another target. Humans didn't break the same way other species did. They weren't motivated by fear of death. They were driven by love, love of family, of home, of freedom. You lost the moment you thought we were weak, Riley said, voice raw, staring into the eyes of the alien conqueror. Zalzor lunged, but the explosion tore through the ship before he could strike. The flagship shattered like glass, breaking apart over the skies of Earth. The blast echoed to the alien fleet, triggering chaos. Leaderless, disoriented, and under constant assault from united human forces, the Krixorian army fell apart. Their remaining ships fled Earth's orbit, harassed every step of the way by scrappy human pilots, some flying machines that should never have left the ground. Back on Earth, the world was forever changed. The scars of battle ran deep. Entire cities had fallen. Millions had died, But out of the ashes rose something stronger than anyone expected: unity. For the first time in history, the nations of Earth looked at one another not as enemies, but as survivors of a shared nightmare. In the small Appalachian town where Riley once lived, his name became legend, not because he was the strongest soldier, not because he was the smartest, but because he represented what every human carried deep inside them: defiance in the face of impossible odds. Years later, children in rebuilt streets told stories of how Earth, a little blue world forgotten at the edge of the galaxy, stood toe-to-toe with empire and refused to die. They didn't remember every battle. They didn't know every strategy, but they knew the heart of the story. An alien general underestimated Earth soldiers, and it cost him the entire war.